This is Taylor King, new media coordinator for Washington Policy Center. You're listening to Washington Policy on the Go. For those of you who don't know, we're a weekly podcast that stands up and speaks on the reasonable policies and ideas for the state of Washington by presenting free market solutions. Washington Policy Center has 8 different centers we focus our research on, and each week we'll hear from someone at WPC to get their take on current events, happenings in the legislature, and new ideas. Today with us on the podcast, you're going to be hearing from Liv Finne, our Director of Education. She is going to be speaking very passionately on a recent legislative memo that she has written, which is just a formal publication that we provide to legislators, anybody that reads our blog, just anyone that'll listen, essentially. And in this legislative memo, we talk about charter schools. We talk about how there's essentially a disparagement of funding for charter schools, so they're just not getting the same chance that public schools are. And this bill is looking to change that at least a little bit. So stick around, and I hope you enjoy the episode.
Welcome to Washington Policy on the Go, Washington Policy Center podcast of news, interviews, and policy analysis.
Fast walk. Yeah.
I walk my dog.
Do you?
So that's
Yeah.
like my excuse and his excuse to exercise. It's perfect.
Very good. Every morning with the dog.
Yeah.
It's very good for you.
Allegedly.
No, it is.
Okay, so I think we're good. So why don't we, let me take my headphones off. We'll start.
All right.
So, Liv Finne.
Yes.
Yeah.
Taylor.
So I guess we'll start. I'm going to drop an introduction in before all of this, but I'm going to do it at the last so I know what I'm talking about in the introduction.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But why don't you tell us how you got into education and then how you got to the Washington Policy Center?
Well, my name is Liv Finne. I'm the Director for Education at the Washington Policy Center. And my educational background is quite varied. I ended up getting a JD in law, a Juris Doctor, they call it, after I went to college. And
Is that here in Washington?
No, it was in Boston, at Boston University Law School.
Okay.
I had been east to school. I went east to college, to Wellesley College, and then I went to law school, and then we moved out here to Seattle, and I practiced law for a number of years. And then I got married and had children, and we moved away from Seattle for a while, and came back to the Los Angeles area. By that time I had a little boy, and then I had another child, a little girl, and I had them in the public schools in Los Angeles. And by that time I decided to stop working as a lawyer. I worked part-time as a lawyer, and then when I had my second child, I decided to stay home to raise them myself.
What was your experience with public schools in Los Angeles?
Well, yes, I put my son in the public school district, the LA Unified School District, which is a district of 700,000 students.
Oh my gosh.
It's almost, it's hard to think of how many children are in that school district, LA Unified School District. I think it's the second largest district in the nation. And I was in a suburban district where most of the people in the neighborhood were middle class, upper middle class. When we were there, the real estate market had really boomed, and it was getting very expensive to live there, to even own a home. So many of the people there were pretty well educated, had money, and I was surprised to learn that the school choice that we had was very limited. We could only put our child in one of 2 schools based on our zip codes. And then when I enrolled my son, I was surprised again when the kindergarten teacher who he was assigned to, who was a fantastic lady from Ohio, told us that she was not going to follow the directives from the state of California or from her principal in how she was going to teach our children how to read. because they were telling her that the method of teaching reading called whole language was the method that she was required to use to teach children how to read. But
Yeah.
she knew better that deep instruction in phonics was the way that actually worked. So here was my first experience with the public education system, and I find a teacher who is rebelling against the whole top-down system.
Wow.
And that tells you something. Then you realize, that teacher's not. There's something wrong with this system that she has to be
That's so
a
crazy.
rebel.
Like you lucked out getting somebody who wasn't following the rules, and you got a better education for it.
Exactly.
For your kids.
Precisely.
That's crazy.
Yes, it was. So here we were. So I thought, oh, thank goodness I have this wonderful teacher. Her name was Ms. Vazanelis, and she used to go in the morning and go swimming before she met the kids, and she was like calm and zen. She was a really cool lady.
Awesome.
And the first thing she did was she took our children and she said, okay, mothers, I'm going to close the door and it will be fine. And of course, we were all worked up about letting our darling little children out of our hands. And she reassured us, and they just loved it. They loved her. She was a great teacher. My son learned how to read right away. He was very challenged. It was a great experience.
That's awesome. So that was kind of your introduction to what the education system does right and a lot of times does wrong.
That was just one of many things that happened in my experience.
I bet we could go on.
We could go on forever.
Just this episode on all of that.
I learned through experience, not through academic. Initially, my exposure to public education was based on my experience, and then being a lawyer, as it was, I started to read everything I could get my hands on to understand who was running this school, who was making decisions over curriculum, who was deciding what teachers we were going to have in the classroom, who was deciding what teachers we weren't going to have in the classroom.
Yeah.
And
which maybe on like a small scale doesn't seem like a big deal, but when you start thinking about this is what's shaping my child's life forever.
Oh,
it's the biggest deal. There's not anything that matters more.
Well, when you have a child, I'm surprised you have this insight into this, really, for such a young person. Really, Taylor, that's a great insight for somebody without a child.
I have little sisters.
Oh, you have little sisters. That's
Yes.
right. I forget that. And
Yeah.
so you see your parents, but it's everything to you. What your child experiences every day is of true urgency, because you know that the experiences he or she is having in the classroom are going to shape his feelings about himself or herself for his lifetime. So,
and parents should have a role in that.
Parents want success. Every parent wants.
Of course.
Every parent wants their child to feel successful in school, and it's almost like there's something. When you have a child, it's almost like when the child is sick, you feel sick. When the child is not thriving, you're not thriving. Yeah. It really affects a parent. So parents, it's like you've moved into a new reality once you have children. You are somehow transformed into becoming an advocate and a protector of this little child. And so that was powerful experience for me. That's how I got very interested in public education policy. And having my background as a lawyer, I started to read and see who it was that was affecting the decisions that were being made in the schools. And I quickly learned that there were powerful interests that were not aligned with the best interests of the children or of the parents, that were forcing decisions to be made from the top on down. And that was years and years ago now.
Yeah. And you decided you wanted to do something about it.
Well,
Eventually
I got this opportunity to work at Washington Policy Center, and they asked me which area of policy I really was interested in, and I said, education, there's no question.
Yeah.
So that's why I've been doing that. That's why I took this position in education. It was terrific.
Great. Well, at least I'm glad you're here.
Oh, Taylor, thank you. It's great it's a great job.
It is.
It is.
I'm working with some really smart people.
Policy is a fascinating area.
It really is.
There's so much to learn, and it's so multifaceted, and some people are very good at it. Some people are not. A lot of it is just trying to understand structures of things, and there's a lot of misunderstanding about that, about the structures of things.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm holding in my hand a recent legislative memo that you wrote. The title very fascinating title, is HB 2788 and SB 6550 to reduce funding discrimination against charter school families. And I think I actually want to start at the end and maybe you can elaborate from there. So you've got a great quote in the conclusion. And it says, the state constitution says it is the paramount duty of the state to make ample provision for the education of every child residing within its borders. And I feel like that's the beginning and the end of the argument for charter schools.
Well, notice how it doesn't say every child except children who decide to enroll in a public charter school.
Yeah, this is
It says every child, and then the end of that clause is regardless of race, creed, sex, or some other factors like that. So they use language of non-discrimination. Every child is treated equally.
Absolutely.
And unfortunately, in Washington State, we have a situation where we are discriminating. We have a funding discrimination policy against children who attend public charter schools.
Sure.
And we have about 3,000 students that are attending one of Washington's 9 public charter schools.
Yep. So actually, before we get into all that, I would want to back up, take a big picture look.
Yes.
So state of Washington, we have public schools, we have private schools,
right,
and then we have charter schools,
right,
which is not a totally new thing, but it is newer for the state of Washington. I think I was reading, it started in 2012. Something got passed in 2012.
Yes.
So maybe work us through
yes,
what charter schools mean for the state of Washington.
Yes.
And what it could mean.
Well, charter schools were developed by a teacher back in Minnesota. I think he was a professor of education in the 1990s, and charter schools started there. That's like over almost 30 years ago. 30 years ago now, this educator came up with a form of schooling that was designed to correct the dysfunctional elements of the traditional public school system. So this smart man realized that many of the complaints that teachers have of the public school system and parents have are caused by the way we've organized our schools. So the way we have like I said earlier, the first thing is that children are assigned to their schools based on their zip codes.
Yeah.
That turns parents into passive recipients of a government program. That is not the way to engage a parent in the education of a child. So charter schools are selected by parents. That gives parents power and agency and responsibility and to make the whole effort a success, which is a very key element and positive part of charter schools.
Absolutely.
But what also is important is that charter schools are run independently of a large central bureaucracy, which is one of the problems. Bureaucracies are ladling
in more than just education.
In more than just education, but in education is particularly bad. These bureaucracies put all kinds of limits on what teachers are allowed to do and teach, and including the collective bargaining agreements that the unions impose. So charter schools are free of those. They're able to design, the teachers at charter schools are able to design their own program and set their own hours and deliver their own curriculum in a way that's free from these sort of central ideas. So in Washington State, these sort of they're like an independent school. They're like an independent school.
Sure.
In Washington State, the union has fought against introducing them here. They were brought here there were people trying to pass them in the 1990s, and the union defeated them then. And then in 2004, the legislature that was controlled by a Democratic governor at the time passed a charter school bill, and the union brought an initiative to defeat it. And then there was so that was in 2004. Then the next thing that happened was actually we had a small role to play in this. In 2011, I wrote an analysis of high-performing charter schools in other states and said Washington State needs to get high-performing charter schools in this state to serve the needs of children that are being underserved by the traditional public schools. And lo and behold, that was picked up by the PTSA, and then that as a policy for their legislative analysis for 2020, for 2012, and then there was a bill introduced. The union killed the bill, and then an initiative was brought before the people, and the people passed charter schools, and that's what brought us to 2012, where we had charter schools passed
Gotcha.
and approved.
So charter schools even before the beginning have been fighting tooth and nail to give more options for students and families.
Yes, for 30 years we've been trying to.
That's exhausting.
Can you believe that?
I can't. I literally can't.
Yes, it is a shocking thing.
Yeah.
That it tells you something about the dysfunction of the current system. That here we have innovations in all kinds of other areas of human endeavor. Airplane.
Well, and living in Washington,
I know.
we are chock full of innovation.
Yes.
In so many ways.
Yes.
And for the public education system to just say, we've got a great system. I don't think anything needs to change.
Right.
And so they just don't. Like, when has that ever worked? Ever, for anything? It doesn't work like that. And so for them to not embrace change,
well,
obviously this is why charter schools have come to be, because
right. And
it's not working for everyone.
And it's ironic because it's the people within the system that are always complaining.
Right.
They're always complaining that they can't control their curriculum. They're always complaining they can't control their time. They're always complaining that there are all these mandates being foisted upon them from outsiders, and that they don't have control or agency over what they offer the kids before them. They're always complaining. Yet you bring them a model that gives them the freedom to do what that they wish they could do,
right.
And they reject it, which tells you they're not thinking clearly. They've been brainwashed by the interests within the system to despise charter schools. There's so much misinformation on this, Taylor. There's just one lie, one myth about charter schools after another that supporters of charter schools have been fighting for ages.
Absolutely. So let's break down a couple of them,
Yeah.
because you talk about them in your most recent legislative memo.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, providing fair treatment for all students. Your very first key finding says that Washington State has a policy of discrimination that denies charter school family access to local operating capital and startup funding. So discrimination is not a word that you toss out lightly here. But when you talk about the fair treatment for all students, you don't think that the public schools is providing that. And even less, they're trying to eliminate charter schools from providing that. Can you kind of expand on that?
Yes. So there's no question that it is true that charter schools do not get the same funding that
Absolutely.
other public schools get. Traditional public.
And why is that? Just
why
on
is
the
that?
biggest level, why do you think that
well,
is?
It's a little complicated and legalistic, but the first initiative that we passed by the people in 2012 was attacked by the union in a lawsuit, and that the court. It went all the way to the state Supreme Court that held that the way that initiative provided for the funding of charter schools was unconstitutional. So then what happened was that was in 2015. That's when the decision came down. Then the next thing that happened was the legislature in 2016 passed a new law, and in the rush to allow charter schools, and created a different funding source for charter schools to comply with the Supreme Court ruling. And in their rush, they didn't correct a failing of the funding, which was that the charter schools didn't get any local levy funding, which amounts to about 17% of a traditional public school's funding,
which is massive.
Which is a lot of money. And
right.
the original initiative had a provision for that. But the subsequent law, in their rush to get it passed, and in the attacks upon it in the legislature, it was impossible for them to do to correct that failing.
And it's been haunting us ever since.
And it's been haunting us it hasn't been corrected because the union is so determined. Okay, so then the union filed another lawsuit and attacked the second charter school law, the one that was passed by the legislature.
So when you say
the
union filed a lawsuit, do they literally? Do they have a team of lobbyists or lawyers, are they just a big old machine?
They are a big old machine.
Certainly sounds like it.
It's a machine, most definitely. I think machine is a good. It's kind of a strong word, but it accurately describes what we have here. The union, until recently, has been able to take union dues from teachers' paychecks without their approval, and they have they make about $40 million in dues every year, and they use some of
Gosh.
this money every year. They're the most powerful lobbyist in the state of Washington, and they use some of their money to file lawsuits against
That's insane.
this.
And I feel like it's interesting too, because I feel like education flies under the radar for a lot of people in Washington because, like myself, I'm a transplant.
Yeah.
I don't have any kids.
Yeah.
You know, we have all these people coming in for the tech industry, all these
Yeah.
people coming in for everything else.
Yeah.
And they're not really touching the education system, but it's affecting the state in ways that we're not going to understand how the ramifications of this for another 20 years, whether it was a good thing or a bad thing. But it's interesting.
Well, that is interesting. The people coming, that's part of the reason why the fact that so many people come here is why we have charter schools.
Yeah.
Because we were the 42nd in the nation to approve charter schools. Charter schools have been doing very well in other states. So people come from other states here. They bring these ideas with them. Oh, my goodness, there's a different way to organize a public school into a public charter school.
Wait, you guys aren't doing the best thing yet? Oh, let's
Exactly.
fix that.
Exactly. So this idea that you can keep out these innovative ideas is just an absurd one. It's a farce. It shouldn't be done here. But here in Seattle, the tech industry is big, and it's also one of the cities with the largest percentage of students in private schools. So that tells
Which
you,
is another indicator, of
Yes.
course.
it's another indicator that the educated people that are coming here for jobs are not liking what they find when they try to put their kids in the public schools.
Yeah.
And they pay for private schools or homeschool them or do online schooling or do anything else. So that's not
Because
a
the
good
fight
thing for society.
The fight for other options is long and arduous,
Yes.
as we've noted.
Yes, and the funding the funding discrimination against charter schools is putting them at risk of closing. We had one school that was supposed to open this last fall, and because it did not have this local levy funding, charter schools don't get any capital funding. You know, traditional schools get free school buildings. Charter schools, by contrast, have to spend about 15% of their operating funding just to pay rent, which is unfair.
Absolutely.
And of course, it constrains the schools from providing the materials and services that they want to provide to the students, which is wrong. So a child who chooses a public charter school is getting less money for his or her education than a child that is assigned to a traditional public school. And that, on its face, is to me is immoral. It's illegal. It's unconstitutional. If a lawsuit was brought by some interest on behalf of charter schools, we would win hands down. A court of law would not uphold such a disparity in funding. It violates all of our principles of fairness and equal opportunity and fair play.
So, all of that being said, obviously there's huge disparity in funding, as you just mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And with all that disparity in funding, you would think that charter schools would suffer because of it. There wouldn't be they wouldn't be able to get students in the doors. They wouldn't be able to find teachers, but that's not really been the case.
No, what's happened is quite the opposite. Every charter school has filled up. There have been wait lists at many of our charter schools.
What more do you need to know about
nothing more than that. There's high demand for charter schools. The different way that these schools are organized and set up is appealing to parents. They like the smaller environment. They like the fact that these charter schools are really motivated to succeed because, of course, their money.
Because they're working about 20% harder with their budget.
They're working. They're delivering more for less.
Absolutely.
And in order to keep their money coming in the door, they have to please their parents.
Yeah.
So they have to
Imagine
listen.
that.
Imagine that. That is a big deal.
Novel idea.
It's a big deal, and so that alone is a force for accountability and improvement that partially explains why charter schools keep getting better and better.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's exciting to see.
You're starting with a system that is able to navigate change because inherently it wants what's best for the student the family, like the parents,
Right. And must please the parent
and has to succeed.
because
But it's like it's a win-win. The
Exactly.
school succeeds because the students succeed. Because the students succeed, the school succeed.
right. Right.
Yeah.
And the money comes with the choice of the charter school. So if the parents don't like the charter school, they'll take their money elsewhere, and the charter school knows that very well. They count the number of students they get because that represents their budget. Whereas the traditional schools don't have any such incentive to be responsive to parents, because the parent disappears and they just shrug their shoulders. We'll get another kid in here. We have plenty of money. That is
Yeah.
so that's
Way less incentivized.
way less incentivized. Way less.
Gotcha. So this is a bill that right now is in the legislature.
Yes.
What does that mean? Is it already passed? Is it like, does that make it a law if they say, yeah, let's do it? Will this be enacted next year? What does this mean for us or for families?
Well, this bill 2788 has been submitted by Eric Pettigrew, a very highly respected Democrat from South Seattle, and who is an African American gentleman, and he has been a champion for charter schools since the very beginning. And he has introduced this bill because of this fact that this school in South Seattle was unable to, closed this school last fall for lack of funding, Ashe Prep.
Right.
And so it became clear to everyone that the lack of funding is creating an impediment and a danger to the continued vitality of the charter school sector in Washington State.
Because not only are these schools that are doing more with less, there's schools that are producing students who are doing better.
Yes.
Why would a state not want their students to have better? It makes no sense.
Well, that's exactly
You must
right.
be slowly losing your mind.
I am, definitely. This is so ridiculous. It really defies
Logic.
reason.
Yeah, of
Mhm.
course. So we have this bill.
Yeah, so we have this bill, and
yeah.
it would provide up to $1,550 per student from state funding to balance out the loss of local levy funding, which is about $2,300 per student. So
it's not even a full correction.
It's not a full correction,
but it's something.
It's something, and it would be a big something.
Absolutely.
And it would really help these schools. It doesn't, the next step would be to get capital funding, some kind of support for a building, so that they don't have to pay for building support. But that's not before us right now. This is to
Yes.
give them actually operating funding. And right now the bill is in committee, and they're having discussions about whether this bill is going to move forward or not. And
So as of now, are they planning on taking a vote? Is that how that works?
Well, it's in the committee. There was been testimony before the committee.
Okay.
The charter school supporters came and testified, and a lot of parents and leaders of charter schools explained how important the option was for their family to be able to send their kid to a charter school. And the union then came and testified that, no, we oppose this bill. So the union basically testified that they support the idea of giving some children less money than other children, simply because of having made the choice to enroll in a charter school, which is completely absurd.
It just
and
feels
wrong.
very anti-child, which is right.
Well, but no, the union always says it needs more money for the sake of the children.
Oh my goodness.
So it's transparent.
They're burning the candle at both ends. And it makes no sense.
It is. It's all political. They're just using language, willy nilly as the circumstances demand. And it was really amazing, because the room was full of charter school children, and this union man had to come back and sit within them. And for the first time in a long time, the tables were turned. He looked like he didn't feel comfortable in that room.
Awesome.
Which was nice. But I'm hopeful that the good sense and fair play of the legislature will shine through and pass this bill. There are a lot of Democrats that have signaled their support for it by virtue of the sponsors on the bill. The problem is getting it out of committee. We'll see what happens there. The last time we had a vote on charter schools in 2016, the bill was in the Education Committee, and that chair is an antagonist of charter schools, and she tried to kill the bill. And then someone pulled it. That Frank Chop, the speaker, pulled it from the committee and took the vote on the floor. And then, and then it passed.
Yeah.
Which I don't now. So now this bill is before a different committee, not the Education Committee, before the Appropriations Committee, and they are the people who are dealing with the money, and so they see it's obvious that it's unfair. They're appropriating money.
They look at money every day.
They
and
look
it's
at
like,
money
oh,
every
this is
day,
not fair. Yeah.
and to give some public school students less money than others. I mean, that's on its face unfair.
Absolutely.
So we'll see. We'll see how they handle it.
Gotcha. Okay, so 2 more questions while we wrap up.
Yeah.
One, let's look at realistic goals for the next year of charter schools. What do you think is like the best, like an absolute win for charter schools that you think is attainable and can happen? Maybe it's this, maybe it's something else, maybe it's multiple things, but for the sake of charter schools, what is the best thing that can happen for them?
This bill is very important for the sake of charter schools, but already there are 5 more charter schools that are going to open next year.
Awesome. Which brings it up to what?
Which will make it a total of 14 charter schools. And every charter school that opens in a community and attracts people from that community. And many of the fears and myths about charter schools fall away because the community sees what good the charter school is doing for their children.
So that does more than a union could ever do on the reverse end.
It's so big.
Just results.
It's just so big.
Yeah.
People start talking about what's going on in the local charter school. I was in a charter school last week in Spokane, Pride Prep Charter School. We were taking videos of the kids that are there.
That's right.
And the best ambassadors for the charter schools are the children themselves. I mean, I had this young girl tell me why this school has been so wonderful for her. And one of the things she said was that children can move along at their own pace. They've organized the school. It's a 6th through 12th grade school. And so the middle school is right next to the high school. So let's say you're a boy who's really good in 6th grade in math and you want to do 9th grade math. You could go over to the high school. They've set it up so the child can go to his level in learning, and vice versa. And that was the first thing she said. And I thought, now that is a great idea. Then they organize programs for kids with special needs. They have like a large percentage of kids that have learning difficulties. And so they set up a sewing program so they could learn how to make things with their hands. And anyone that's made things with their hands knows how affirming using your hands and making something is. And for a child that has had struggle in school, that's a very smart psychological thing to do, to show them how to make a skirt or a dress.
Absolutely.
And that has become so popular that the kids without special needs are demanding access. And now they have a whole design team, and it's amazing. Yes, so the school has responded to the demands of the children.
It's a responsiveness that you're just not seeing.
You don't see that. No,
I love it.
Yeah, it's a great thing. And it was so moving and exciting to hear about this school and see how it's working. And so it truly, all you need is a little exposure to a charter school. There are a lot of people that haven't visited a charter school yet. They should all go see one and see for themselves who the children are that are being benefited. Most of the children in these charter schools are children who have not been doing well in public schools. 60% are low-income minority children whose families are disenfranchised by the system as it is, and they are so grateful to have this option because they then feel that they have a potential of success in school. Because, of course, they've all heard about the failing statistics. They talk about the school-to-prison pipeline in these inner cities. They're scared to death. These single women that have little boys that are afraid that their children are going to get caught up in a gang when they get to middle school. And they have no option.
Guess he'll just keep going and hope for the best.
What can they do?
Yeah.
And they know they're stuck. They have no money. They have no husband. They have no choices. They work round the clock just to feed their children.
Absolutely.
And to give them an option. I heard this woman, this testimony in this bill. She was fantastic. She was a single mother. She was a victim of domestic abuse. She had moved here to get away from her husband, and she was stuck. And she found this school, and I heard 90% of the kids go to college. She said, I'm so excited about this school. I'm so grateful for this school. You just can't take these things away from people once you give it to them.
Yeah. This is the start of something.
Yeah.
Start of something.
Yeah. It's
Great.
really big.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, so last question. So I want you to give me your elevator pitch for charter schools and I want you to tell us, and I'm going to say us is the legislators. So why don't you tell us, me, the legislators, why we need charter schools and why they're so important, and they need to like pull their head out from the sand and realize that this is something that is happening. So you might as well like help us with it. So what's your
Well, if
motivate us?
of course, you want every child in Washington schools to flourish and prosper and do well in school. And these charter schools are giving many families that have had no hope of success in school a second chance at success. How can you not be part of such a thing, such a movement? This is what our nation is about giving opportunities to everyone, regardless of their backgrounds. And closing off a charter school option is the opposite of the American dream. It's a failure. It's a failure because closing charter schools is just an expression of special interest power, nothing more, nothing less. So if you really believe in the potential of the American people, you would open more charter schools. You would help fund them better. You would give them buildings, because charter schools not only help the children, but they help the educators and the leaders in the schools to meet their full potential as educators. So they really are an expression of freedom in every way.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I agree.
Yeah, good.
And charter schools are great.
They are.
But yeah, so I think that's about it. I guess we're a little bit over time, but
you can cut it. I'm sure you can cut some of it.
yeah, but thank you very much
it's
for
a
talking
pleasure.
with me.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Taylor. Anytime. Thank you.
Okay, I think that's going to wrap things up. Thank you for listening to Washington Policy on the Go. You could be doing a lot of other productive, fun, or awful things right now, but you chose to stick with us and learn a thing or two. Everything we discussed today will be in the show notes on our website, along with a transcription of our conversation for those of you who also like to read things from time to time. Speaking of words, you can visit our website, washingtonpolicy.org, to read all on the latest news on our research, what's happening in the legislature, and sound policy principles. From there, you can also find all the necessary links to our social media, which engages with people just like you all over the great state of Washington. If you like today's podcast, it would really mean the world to me if you would let us know. You can do that by giving us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or really anywhere else you might be listening to this podcast. Once again, I'm Taylor King, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks for listening to Washington Policy on the Go. If you liked it, tell a friend and share this episode on your social media. Send any questions or comments to us at washingtonpolicy@washingtonpolicy.org.